Hello, welcome Igor to the podcast.
Thank you.
So this is the Sacred Surf Shack podcast with Igor. Is it Vasil?
Vasilevitsky.
Shit, okay. I've never actually pronounced that before. So for those that want to know, this Igor is my mentor and therapist, a brother that supported me deeply over the last 6 months. His work is in the therapy world is something that I haven't witnessed, and I've been and saw many therapists. He has an approach that is very holistic, and very deep. He's a wise, kind, loving, and penetrating man, masculine. I get a strong sense that Igor is on quite a unique path and trajectory to those in the spiritual self-development communities. Is very pure and very clean from what I can sense. Probably why I have a deep resonance with this beautiful human, beautiful soul. And today we're going to be chatting about the deeper masculine structure and containment of the psyche, and then wherever else it needs to lead us. But before we start that, without further ado, I'd like you, Igor, if you could just share a little about yourself, the viewers, a little bit about your story of how you've landed to where you are now.
Well, man, that's a hard introduction to follow up. I feel very honored. That's really beautiful what you said about me. Thank you. Just before I begin, there's a heater on here. Is that too loud, or is that okay for the sound?
I can't even hear it.
All right, good. Yeah, so yeah, I'm a psychotherapist. Basically, that's really what I term myself as. But the transpersonal spiritual aspects are part of my framework. I guess I traverse the different spaces of what you might call coaching, deep psychotherapy, mentorship, and aspects of the spiritual, I suppose, therapeutic space, as well as sort of polarity work with couples and with individuals and that sort of thing. I started off my career started in IT, and that was many years ago, and I was very unhappy in that place, and so I quit and studied and kind of traveled, and then I found my passion, found my purpose, and I've been a writer and a therapist ever since. So that's maybe, I don't know, 18 or so years now.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. It's quite a long time as well. A lot of experience in the field, especially traversing. It's kind of like a bit of a minefield out there these days, but I'm sure when you began, it was very different to, for my own journey, traversing like counseling, psychotherapy, and kind of the similar work. It's very different to how you were probably traversing it 18 years ago when you first began. What are some of the challenges that you kind of faced in the beginning, kind of like of your journey into, how you work today?
Can you just refine that question for me? I'm not sure what you mean there.
Like some of the challenges you had to navigate, like something 18 years ago, that was 2003, and it even just like recently got 9/11 that happened, and but there was kind of a different space to be in, holistically, and I'm sure navigating that and for your own spirit would have been brought up some challenges to face as a young man.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenges really were more, my experience is that we're all human beings and we're all sharing the same thing since time immemorial. So I felt, that people were challenged with the same things they challenged with now back then. So from that perspective, things haven't really changed much. It's more that I've changed, I'd say, in terms of the depth of where I can go because of my own self-development. So yeah, the challenges have been just when I haven't been able to meet someone somewhere to be able to do my work in order to then be able to meet them better next time I see them. So it's just been about deepening and widening my consciousness and my structure, my therapeutic abilities and offerings to the people I work with. Yeah, not so much the climate or environment. And they just trigger the same wounding, the same patterns that we all tend to share, in my experience.
Yeah, I totally resonate with you there. There's a lot of beauty in relation to others that can be revealed. I'll come back to I guess we'll start off with you know, how you deepened into your own masculine sort of presence, and maybe just start to speak from your own perception of the deeper masculine. As you and I both know, there's a lot of fuckery around the masculine and feminine spaces at the moment, but then at the same time, there's also the other side, which is there's a lot of purity and integrity around it. So I know I sense that within you. So if you could, speak into the deeper masculine, what that means.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was more conditioned into the feminine my whole life just because of my circumstances and my constitution. And then only a few years ago, I've started to kind of really connect into this experientially what the deeper masculine is within consciousness and being able to activate and create, literally create self through the deeper masculine, because that's what the deeper masculine does. It establishes the person, the individual in the world as a unique and individuated and separate entity unto itself. So my exploration's been about all the different aspects and facets that we need to invoke and strengthen, and we can go into what these are maybe later in this conversation, because ultimately it creates a structure around the psyche in which the psyche can be housed. And the elements of that structure are different, just like a composition of a building or a house has different materials that it needs in order to for it to be built. And so from that place, it was it was experiential understanding what the deeper masculine is, and then how do I offer that, and how do I transmit that through my presence, through my energetic structure, and through my guidance and facilitation of the other person's process. And that's, to some extent also the type of work you and I have done, where there have been aspects where I've been able to contribute to your own container, to your own deeper masculine deepening, strengthening, awakening. So yeah, and out of that came a program that I've developed called Structured, which is really about just bringing in the deeper masculine. And because I could see that every one of my clients, like literally every one of my clients, was yearning for it, called it different things, but actually was needing resources from the deeper masculine, because there's a lot of beautiful feminine energy and understandings and teachings around, but the masculine is very, very different to the feminine. There's a lot, I guess, mostly the work out there is more rooted in feminine ways of healing and growth. And we can talk about that too if you're interested to discuss that.
Yeah, I was just about to ask the next question, and just before I ask it, like your transmission of the deeper masculine from working with you has tremendously shifted my way of being, my family, with my partner, just with everyone, even with my clients. I can really sense there's, the feminine or psyche is more contained and more structured in my orientation. Not to say that there's more depth to go, but your clean transmission of this shows the work that you're doing on yourself, which is amazing. The question that arose out of that was, could you make a distinction between the deeper masculine, and I imagine the opposite as the deeper feminine, but a distinction between the both is, like you said, stated just then, is a lot of the healing self-development is more orientated to the feminine way of healing. I can sense.
Yeah. So if in the context of healing, in the context of inner growth, and therefore in the context of polarity dynamics between the masculine and the feminine, the feminine is all about opening and surrendering and letting go and restfulness and melting. So that's kind of more the steps or approach or the movements of consciousness, let's say, in order to, release things and deconstruct things and melt old beliefs and dissolve old patterns and surrender old ways of being and dismantle identities. The trouble with that is, if there is no masculine, is, well, what are we left with? If we're just always dismantling, well, we're going more and more into the void. There's nothingness, there's just nothingness there. And the truth is that in this plane, we need to function, we need to relate, we need to have our own individual sense of self. Otherwise, we're just kind of enmeshed with everything else, just like a child is when they're first born into the world. So we need to have boundaries. We need to have a definition of self. We need an identity. Because if we just keep dissolving, we're just kind of connected to all the energies around. And that's what happens with a lot of people who stay in those spiritual spaces. They'll come to me and they're quite merged with things and struggling with definition and leaking them their unique sense of essence and eros into the world. Because there's nothing containing or holding that anymore. They've dissolved it all. They've surrendered, and the next piece and the next piece. Well, there's no kingdom now to hold it all in place. So, and this is part of what's been happening in the last, not even sure how long, right? But this rising of the divine feminine. This rising of the divine feminine is all about breaking down the patriarchy, which is control mechanisms and restrictions and confinements and other imprisonments in culture, but within consciousness as well. Right? It's like, look at the whole gender thing. Let's break that down too. Let's have, what is it now, 33 different genders.
Yeah.
And so we're flooded with different options. Now, what happens with the feminine when she doesn't have the support of the masculine to hold her? Well, there's just infinite choice. So then we are flooded with choice. We're flooded with options. Now, what does that say for forget about us? What about our children? Where's the guidance for them? A guidance is a form of structure to maneuver them towards certain values that we see, as, let's say, benevolent, or to help them choose, right? As opposed to, well, infinite choice. You can choose your gender, you can choose what you wear, you can choose if you study, if you don't, whatever it is in life. We're flooded with choice, and we have that in the world at the moment on multiple levels. There's so much choice that in that much choice, without any kind of guidance or restriction, there's chaos, and that is what happens with the feminine when she doesn't have the support of the masculine. There's chaos. She goes into chaos instead of flow. So the masculine, then, conversely, is what the deeper masculine, the old masculine, would step in to try to create order through control. And so the deeper feminine, as she arose, broke that down. But there was no deeper masculine to come in and hold her now in a healthy way, hold and contain rather than confine and control. So the deeper masculine is all about bringing in this really strong, firm, loving container around our emotions, around our energies, around our essence, around our families and our culture, to hold that energetically, to guard it, to shield it, to create a kingdom in which the feminine and the children, the child consciousness, can feel safe to play and express and play with choice and options and flourish with color. So the masculine is all about creating more structure, but just healthy structure. It's not about creating repression. It's creating channels, right? So let's say the feminine's like, just going with the flow and what feels good, and something comes up and you flow in that direction. Something else comes up, you flow in that direction. But then where do you end up when we follow our impulsivity, right? We can kind of just have experience after experience without building anything meaningful in life. Whereas when the masculine creates a channel, like a structure, let's say we're going this way, then she can flow, the energy can flow, the eros can flow into that direction. But we need those boundaries within our consciousness. So the masculine is all about creating these structures to hold us, to be able to choose which part of our vulnerability, our emotions, our sexuality can flow under which conditions and in which directions, right? That's how we create a value system in life. This is how, someone can hold their sexual energy back despite a beautiful people around, containing that, but opening that deeply to their lover or to their partner, right? So we need that on all levels, intellectually, so that thoughts don't run everywhere, emotionally, spiritually. So the deeper masculine for me is completely polar opposite to the feminine way of, in its very essence and nature, and with how we approach healing. So instead of breaking stuff down, we're bringing structure to hold what has opened. And that can bring a lot of healing. It's like a lot of people will be like, oh, I need to surrender even deeper now, and even deeper. And maybe now if I surrender deeper, I'll feel safe. No, safety will come when we have some boundaries around that. Containment, not breaking stuff down even more, so that we're even more open and unguarded in the world. So this is the way I see it. There is a gap out there, at least in my experience, of teachings and modalities, and there's such an onus on the feminine way of healing and growing, and my offering is this kind of masculine structure building within the nervous system, within the energetic field, to stop the leakages and to create a assertive, stronger, healthier sense of self in the world.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing such a potent response to that question. And I like how I see it in my mind, I guess in a metaphor, is like the deeper feminine. It's like there's a middle, like the waters, and then within it is like what comes out of the waters, just like a boat or some sort of thing to flow down. And then the deeper masculine creates a channel, or like some sort of, not such a moat, but something to guide this boat to where it needs to go. And then there's the different channels going different places. But if you just had, say, the deeper, like you said, a deeper feminine creating from this pond or ocean of creation, and it flows out, and there's no sort of channels and no sort of containment of that, it's just going in all directions, and there's no sort of direction, and it can become quite meaningless and feeling of purposelessness. And I see what you're saying around the deeper feminine, just surrendering and melting, and how that, and I've experienced this, it just creates an unsafety. It can create a chaotic sort of like, I don't know what I'm doing or where I'm going. And I think that's one of the things you definitely supported me in, was to recognize that containment structure is equally, if not more, necessary to function in the world of this material plane, so we can land in our purpose, or land in.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like I surrender, but then I drop into something else. But that something else, there needs to be a structure to catch it before I can maybe dissolve that structure and surrender deeper, right? And the trouble is, when we don't create that, we just surrender into deeper woundings all the time, unstructuredness, right? The other thing is that we're human beings, and human beings it's one thing to kind of go, well, I'm going to be a mystic, so I'm going to surrender everything and become one with everything. But we're not. We're trying to be functional in relationships. So we need to have boundaries. We can't just be spirit and eros. We need to have boundaries, because boundaries are where I end and you begin. We need to have that definition. We can't deal with codependencies or enmeshments by just endlessly letting things go. We need to have strong boundaries of, well, I don't need to rely on you because I can contain myself. I don't need you to contain me, let's say. There's a codependency gone. So quite often, I'll work with people on developing these boundaries in relationships, and this containment, this structure piece, that then my boundary can meet your boundary in relationship. Not my essence meets your essence and we entangle and intertwine and that does happen. It's a beautiful merging of our essences, true, but without boundaries, we get lost, we get entangled. We need to have a relationship with boundaries, with the human and with the more subtler, deeper, more joyful, eros-y kind of connections at times.
Yeah, and I like how I'm hearing that. It's almost like the deeper masculines, like the human side of life, and then you've got the feminines, like you said, the spirit, the eros, the mystic, the magic. But with one, you can't have one without the other if you're wanting to, I guess, experience what they call union or oneness or operating from that space. Because then, like you said, it's like there's an entanglement of the essences and an enmeshment, and then a codependency arises from that, which then can and often becomes dysfunctional because there's no boundary and no relationship to the deeper masculine. And even just as you're speaking into that, it makes it so much clearer that this sort of, I guess I wouldn't say trending, but this unfolding feminine, where it's like surrendering and melting, and then almost like we're going that this like bypassing the human, like not honoring the human side of life at all, just kind of going deeper and deeper, and completely almost disregarding that you are here as a human having an experience as well.
Yeah, I would say that there's an aspect of that that's true, that the feminine mysteries are very esoteric and mystical, and so in just following that path, we become more mystical. We become more about the subtler realms of experience. But the masculine is all about being here and now and assertive and building and creating and conquering and challenge. Give me the challenge of the density, he says. I'm going to protect the spiritual, the esoteric, the subtle, the feminine realms, right? And I'm going to carry that through this density, through this life. But we need to build that. We need to awaken that in consciousness.
Yeah, I like how you said, welcome the challenge. Well, at the same time as
part of the masculine, which is part of the masculine. Masculine loves the challenge, doesn't back down. The deeper masculine is someone who is guided by the feminine, let's say, in a specific direction in life. She intuits. She's the oracle. She goes, that way we go. And he goes, I'm going to lead you there. And I'm going to protect you along the way. And I'm going to surmount the challenges on the way. And every challenge he surmounts, he grows his sense of confidence in the world and his abilities to protect her. He thrives on challenges, absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like this is probably one of the, and we were chatting about this in our last session about like a missing piece for men, where men are like, oh, feel your feelings. Oh yeah, get in your feelings. It's like, that has its place, but men need challenge. Just like the warrior that goes to battle, they don't go and feel their feelings before battle. They get themselves prepared for battle, go to war, kill people, watch their friends get killed, and then after, obviously this will go on back ancient times because it's more brutal, and then afterwards it's like then they surrender and melt into the feelings afterwards and the challenges that they faced, and then they have their own sort of dissolving because they've faced the challenge and there's a structure there to hold it or contain it.
Yeah, the masculine relates to the feminine, and of course there's a place and there's a necessity to connect to feelings and emotions and the feminine realm, because if she's not there, he's destructive in the world. That's why she needed to arise in the first place, because there was a lot of destructive masculine energy. But now we need the constructive masculine energy to come up and meet her in her needs.
Yeah, I agree. What keeps coming circling around for me is around, I guess, this like moving. I pose the right question. It's around parenting and being with children. Obviously, you know, I'm in the thick of it, and you have your own son.
I do.
Is there anything you can share? Like obviously, what we've just spoken about is incredibly helpful for parents in general, containment structure. I've been learning through my own experience just how potent it is for the father just to rest in that masculine role of just to contain and then guide from that place. When, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, say if our inner child, so as a parent, often what can happen is our inner child can become evoked, and then all of a sudden you've got a child and an inner child that can sometimes try and almost go head to head if you don't have the awareness to contain and hold the child. Could you speak into like the notion around reparenting your own inner child whilst parenting?
Well, we certainly need to be able to meet and give to our inner child those resources that he didn't have. And sometimes they're feminine resources like love and compassion and empathy and sensitivity. And at other times it's, it's the masculine aspect, which is the protection piece or the guiding or the shielding or the steadfastness or the patience, let's say. So we need to do that, I believe, by ourselves outside of our parenting times. But, if it comes up with a child, then, it's a tricky bit of business because we have to we get triggered and we need to hold our own with a specific resource. And then we need to do the same potentially for our child. At the same time, we're human. And so we're going to mess up, and that's okay. One of the things I'd say, it's part of the both masculine and feminine, or just our nature, is then to be able to come back to our child and say, hey, I feel remorseful at not having been able to show up for you then, let's say. That's a healing piece in itself. It can't show up as divine masculine and feminine all the time. So with our kids, we do just need to it's about attunement, I would say. It's also about knowing what we play and what our partner plays, what kind of essence role. If our partner is very feminine, and we have a tendency to be in our emotions, we're not bringing a lot of, let's say, masculine holding to the child. So it's about knowing the dynamics within the household, knowing when we need to bring in more sternness, more discipline, more uncompromisingness at times, to give that strong modeling of a boundary to a child to absorb. Because if we're all kind of just melting in a love bubble, it all feels really nice, but it's not creating, the structure that the child needs. And the child is also looking at you and your partner, how you relate, the masculine and the feminine. How's that dance going? So there's quite a lot of things to contemplate there. Yeah.
You spoke into a lot, and you're right. There's a lot of things for the viewers to listen back and contemplate. I know from my own experience, and I'll just share briefly, like, I notice when I'm out of the house or my partner's out of the house, it's a completely different experience with the children. Like, they're I guess the attunement, they listen and this, but then between my partner is like, there's still some messiness that we're cleaning up and around the masculine and feminine sort of roles. And it like comes back to the attunement, attuning to each other and attuning to the family dynamics. I'm glad you kind of brought up attunement, because it's kind of like it's quite a missing element from what I can sense and see with people that I meet, whether clients, friends, family, people, is they're not attuned at all to people, and they might believe they are, but they're not. And I know I'm quite sensitive, but there's been times where I wasn't attuned at all, and since having children, it's forced me into attuning and a refinement of that. Could you speak into a little bit about attunement and what that is? Because you can see the word attunement, but there's actually it's actually quite a large sort of concept. Or
yeah, I mean, for me, attunement is just that sensitivity, that radar to another person. And some people are incredibly attuned to others, but they're not very contained. So they kind of reach out with their psyche, with their field, with their felt sense into the environment. Usually happens from trauma, because when the child is first merged in the world, it doesn't come back into a separate sense of self. He kind of stays out there, she stays out there to suss out any danger. If there's a dangerous minefield, emotional minefield, physical minefield outside, to gauge for any future danger. So he keeps a part of himself or herself out there in the environment. Now, with some people, they remain that way, very attuned and knowing what's happening with you or inside of you, tracking you, feeling you out on multiple levels, to protect him or herself. So that's a form of attunement, but it's not very healthy or conductive to the person. Whereas some go the opposite way. They just wall up, let's say, become separate, but are very guarded from the world, very, very walled up, very rigid, very barriered, and they have no reach into the world. They feel maybe safe and protected, but they're very isolated. So there's no attunement. There's no sense of what's going on. Traditionally, it's been more masculine to be that way. It's been more encouraged to be, less feeling, let's say. So men have shut down their emotions, have become a lot more rigid. And because of that, there's a lack of attunement to their inner feminine and to women outside, right? So that's why we've had so many, problems with consent and, misunderstandings around relatings, because there's no sensitivity to when the woman's welcoming you or she's open, because you need that. You need to feel that. So the feminine isn't explicit in her invitations. She's more implicit, she more implies. And for that, we need to have that radar. So really the healthy attunement is to have a separate sense of self with healthy boundaries that allows some permeability of our feeling sense into the world. So when I work with clients, I used to have this problem too, where it's like I was too connected into the client, and so I could take stuff on or bring the client home with me afterwards, energetically speaking. When I developed my structure, my container, it just became easier to be here, but also reach out and touch and know and sense where the client is at. So I know where I am and I know what is the client's. So to me, that is attunement, whether it's in relationships or with our children. It's the same thing. It's like, oh, I can feel where they're at, sort of, so I kind of feel the edges of their experience. And I know where I'm at. I know what's going on inside my walls. I'm not getting lost in that, in their experience of things. And it doesn't need to necessarily manipulate me, because we also get manipulated if we don't have our own sense of self. We feel we're manipulated, but actually we're kind of allowing the manipulation to happen, or we're manipulating ourselves, really. Gaslighting, right, is something that we usually accuse other people of doing to us, and yet I found that when a psyche which is not separate, doesn't have a strong structure, merges with somebody else's, psychologically, emotionally, then their thoughts and their emotions, possibly about us, and their judgments, possibly about us, become confused as our own, or as if it's being imprinted into us or forced into us. But actually what's happened is we simply cannot separate from the other person's thoughts and ideas about us. So I can't remember what the question was, but I'm kind of rambling here. Attunement, yeah. So that's, to me, that is attunement. To me, is having that separate sense, the balance between the two.
Yeah, I was about to.
How strongly can I hold myself? At the same time, how far in the world can I reach out?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's I thought I've kind of the same thing working with you and other people, and then within myself have learned, especially with children, and my partner is. I was very much like yourself, would get lost in the sensations and the felt sense and the sensitivity of life and others, but not have a boundary of containment. And then it went the other way for a period of time where I was kind of guarded and walled up, and I didn't want to share me. And it's like that pendulum swing, you're trying to come back into the center of the balance of both, so you can operate as like you said, a separate individual, but also still be intimately and intrinsically connected to everyone else, where it doesn't take us away from. But you answered the question beautifully.
Yeah. And the way that we come back to ourselves is we can't come back to ourselves unless we develop a self to come back to. And that self is that masculine structure. The self it's the masculine structure containing our essence, right? So that's the full self. But if we don't have a boundary, a structure around it, we literally don't have a self. We're just essence connecting to things. Yeah.
So would you say, because obviously in a lot of like non-duality teachings and that sort of stuff, it's like, there's no self, and in essence the essence is no self, but then the masculine is the self. Is that self, I guess, made up of concepts, healthy concepts, or healthy sort of self, to then contain the no self or the essence?
I would say that it's not made up of concepts. I'd say it's made up of an energetic assertion of an aspect of self. It's the will to exist as a autonomous being in this world, right? It's like I will myself into being. I will myself and I assert myself here, right? So it's like I exist, I'm here, right? On another level, we're also one with everything, right? But if we just keep going there, well, we're going to be connected to everything, and we're going to be everything. And well, then if I'm everything, then there's no you or me. We're not in relationship. Our kids are not our kids. We're just all one. How do we function from that place? It's like there's a relative reality that we need to be a part of, where we do have a separate sense of self. So it's beautiful if a person can have experiences of connectedness to everything, but it needs to come through a structure of self, of a unique consciousness. I mean, even the gurus, they still have a unique individual perspective. It's like I'm here and I'm one with everything. I'm not just one with everything, and therefore it's I'm dissociated fully from my body and my bodily functions. There is a locus of consciousness, of focus that is here in each one of us, and that needs to be guarded, and that needs to be a separate sense of self. So my work is all about creating that structure to hold that, to give definition to it. It's not made up of concepts. It's like, this is who I am and that is who I am. It's a feeling, it's a shape to my consciousness. It's a shape I give to my consciousness, right? To hold my consciousness. Now that shape can change, but only if I choose it to. It's not going to be shaped because I'm connecting with you and now we've created some other shape and we don't even know who we are anymore. It's like, no, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. How else do we know what each of us stands for? These are my values. I've decided to create a shape around that.
Beautifully said. Yeah, that's kind of what I've like, because obviously you read all these different things and, oh, what is this, what's that, and like I've landed at that same sort of place, probably not as deep as yourself, but it's like, yeah, it's like there's a containment in the structure of the consciousness that then we go into the world, because like you said, it's like it's beautiful to moments of oneness and connectedness and that sort of deep experience of life. But that's, to me, is you can get lost in that, and there's a big wave of spiritual bypassers experiencing that, where they're letting lost in that. And like you said, I think you said locus. What do you?
Yeah, locus.
I mean,
of centeredness. It's like,
yeah. I mean, having a center, like having a.
Not having a center. That's right. But
Yeah.
how do we have the question is, how do we have the center? We talk a lot about that in spiritual circles or in developments, like centeredness and groundedness and anchoredness. But what is that? And how does that feel? How do we create that? How do we know we have it? And in these experiences of either deep surrender, do we still have a sense of self within that, or even in the connectedness, the beautiful connectedness with our lover or with oneness or Pharos? The real magic isn't we have that and then we've lost ourselves in it and then we come back to ourselves. It's can we have that, and at the same time, this is me within that. I have a sense of self and connectedness with oneness at the same time. And that's quite a profound and beautiful experience. It's paradoxical.
Because to say it's paradoxical, yeah.
It's paradoxical, but it's very possible in my experience.
Yeah, I highly believe it is possible, and the world's made up of paradoxes, and I think it's I guess it's all coming back to is like we live in duality, and it's the opposites. It's how can we live in both, experiencing both simultaneously without getting lost into one or the other. It's a wild thing to hold in the mind, because it's not something that can be fully held in the mind. It's something that we have to experience and go through. And you've articulated just from that question, because I this is something that I've been sitting with for a while. Like I went quite deep into non-duality, but then I kind of was going to get lost in it. I was like, okay, I can see this is amazing and beautiful, but then you look out and see that world, and there's a lot of bypassing going on. And I think that's like one of the biggest issues or problems in the inner development, self-development, spiritual development, what do you want to call it, is the whole like bypassing and avoiding and suppressing. And I know I go there and have been there, and it's a challenge to traverse, because some of the wounding that we have is quite dark and quite gross.
Yeah, well, it's just, I think, maybe an extra piece to the work that's out there. It's some pieces don't need to be surrendered. Some pieces need to be held better. And some pieces don't need to be let go of. They need to be protected, And so why is it that a lot of people don't heal from a lot of wounds, no matter how much clearing or shifting or transmuting they do? It's because there are certain resources that are missing. And, my discovery for myself and for the clients I work with is these other pieces, which to me are experienced as the deeper masculine, and then when we introduce those pieces into wounds that they've kind of worked on for a long time, quite often they are specific medicines that help those wounds.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of brought that up around the specific medicine. I know the way you work is it's very unique into the individual, and that you attune to what they need. And I feel like in the psychotherapeutic world, it's the frameworks and the modalities can sometimes be limiting to the client. I know I've experienced it where I haven't felt fully held, or seen or acknowledged, because there's a modality coming at me or some sort of framework coming at me, and it's actually caused me to become more confused or enmeshed or caught up in my own shit, rather than to actually create, whether it's an opening, a clearing, or to be held and contained in. Can you speak into that if you feel forward?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on the practitioner's ability to, and confidence actually, in who they are and their own gifts and their own structures that they can offer, as opposed to leaning on techniques that they've learned. Because techniques that we learn can very easily be used by ego, by our insecurities, to shield ourselves from actually meeting the other person as we are and as they are. So, in the beginning, I also would, at times when I didn't know what to do, but I felt like I should be doing or helping in some way, or paying clients, I would dip into the toolkit for some kind of method or process. And of course, it can be helpful, but nothing substitutes being able to be kind of naked, bare naked, as who you are, with the other person's experience. Quite often, that's just that is the healing piece. Forget about masculine, feminine, containment, surrender. It's just about the meeting and the being with. So you can feel that when you're working with someone, whether they can be human with you or they're being expert with you, they're being coach with you or they're being real with you. So, it just depends on what the client needs. For me, when I work with them, just kind of sussing where they are and what they're needing. At times they are needing someone to be an expert. And so it's about stepping into that space and offering that energy to them, because that's what their system is yearning for, mentorship, let's say. And then at other times it's just about being with the person in their or around their experience. Sometimes it's about offering containment to their experience. And a therapist can't do that unless it's in their field. They can guide them to developing it, but it's not the same thing as offering it through transmission, through presence. So quite often people, complex people, let's say, will share a lot of different parts of themselves. And it's not about drilling into any part. It's about me having a big enough container, energetic container, to hold all their parts and all their complexities. And then they're able to feel held, feel understood. Like for the first time, they feel like all their parts are now held, not just this part or that part. And they can take that into their own psyche. So it's really about the versatility, I think, of the therapist, the energetic, emotional, psychological, and spiritual versatility of a therapist to be able to, in a way, shapeshift without losing center, to meet the other person, rather than turning them into a formula. It's like, oh, you have these symptoms, we're doing this NLP process kind of thing. Within reason, because at times these processes can be helpful, certainly.
Yeah, thank you. I like what you said about being the shapeshifter and being able to become, I don't want to say the roles, but become these different sort of archetypes or energy for the client or the person. It doesn't have to be a client, it could be just even in life in general, depending on what you're welcoming and facing. And it's just, would this be one of those sort of paradoxes again, where you yourself or the person offering this is naked and exposed and vulnerable, yet like contained, structured, and not naked and exposed, like one of those sort of like weird sort of paradoxes of being both simultaneously.
Yeah, you got to be both. I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily vulnerable. I wouldn't be vulnerable in that situation, but I could meet somebody's vulnerability with my sensitivity. And both of those things come from the same sort of inner place of feeling. Because if I've been in that vulnerability in myself before or something similar, then I have the sensitivity to be able to be with their experience and in their rawness and their woundedness with enough sensitivity to meet it. And then at the same time, yeah, have the containment energetics there. So as the healing element.
I like how you made that distinction with vulnerability and sensitivity. So meeting vulnerability with our sensitivity, and that it's dependent on our own sensitivity to our own vulnerabilities and how deep we've met that. I think that's very potent in that little small segment. So just before we sort of finish up, is there anything else you want to chat about? Anything else you want to go over from the chat we've had so far?
No, I think we've covered some good ground there. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot there for people to
Yeah.
to chew on and digest. But if anyone's interested, they can follow me. I do a lot of writings on Facebook. Maybe you can share that link, or they can get in touch with me if they are interested in doing any of this kind of work or any kind of psychotherapy work as individuals or couples. Other than that, yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being guests on here, and thanks for the work you do in the world. I'll tag or drop Igor's where you can contact him, where you can find him. Highly recommend working with this individual. Beautiful man. He supported me greatly, continues to do so. And I'm sure, again, I'll get you on the podcast round 2 about something else. I think it'd be fun to do that again. So thank you again, Igor. Thank you for your time. It's really awesome to have this conversation.
Thanks very much, mate.